I worked as a commercial fisherman out of Dutch Harbor, Alaska, for about 12 years. We ran a trawler, dragging nets across the ocean floor for cod, pollock, and flatfish. It's grueling work, 18-hour days, freezing temperatures, waves that can flip a boat if you're not careful. This happened during king crab season in November of 2019. We were about 40 miles northwest of the Pribilof Islands, working in water around 400 feet deep. The weather was holding, cold but clear, which was a blessing that time of year. We'd made 3 good pulls that morning. The nets were coming up heavy, full of crab. Around 2 p.m. we dropped the nets for a 4th run. Standard procedure. We'd let them drag for about an hour, then haul them back up. But when we started the winch to bring the nets up, something was wrong. The resistance was massive, way heavier than it should have been, even with a full catch. Snagged on something, our deck boss said, probably a rock formation. We tried reversing, changing angle, everything we could to free it. Nothing worked. Whatever we'd caught, it wasn't letting go. It took almost 3 hours to get those nets to the surface. When they finally breached, we could see why they were so heavy. There were bodies in the nets, human bodies, not 1 or 2. Dozens of them, maybe 40, 50 people, all tangled in the webbing. Men, women, different ages. They were wearing regular clothes, jeans, jackets, sneakers, not survival suits or life vests. But here's what made it worse. They'd all been down there for a while. Weeks, maybe months. The cold water had preserved them to an extent, but they were pale, bloated, and the smell when they came up was indescribable. We immediately stopped the winch and called the Coast Guard. While we waited, we tried to make sense of what we were seeing. These people weren't dressed for open ocean. They looked like they'd been on land when something happened to them. The Coast Guard arrived about 2 hours later. They took statements from all of us, photographed everything, and eventually cut the nets free. We lost about $30,000 worth of equipment, but none of us cared. We just wanted to get away from those bodies. Later, we learned they'd come from a fishing vessel that went down 3 months prior, about 60 miles south of where we found them. It had been carrying workers being trafficked, part of a human trafficking operation moving people across international waters. When the vessel started taking on water, the crew locked the workers below deck and abandoned ship. All 47 workers drowned. Their bodies drifted with the current for months before we caught them in our nets. The thing that still bothers me is how they were positioned in the nets. Some of them were facing upward, arms outstretched like they were reaching for the surface, like they'd been trying to swim up when they died. I quit fishing after that season, couldn't do it anymore. Every time we dropped the nets, I'd think about what else might be down there waiting to get caught, and I'd wonder how many more bodies are still drifting in those currents, just waiting for someone to find them. I was a Coast Guard rescue swimmer stationed out of Kodiak, Alaska for 6 years. Our job was simple in theory. When a vessel goes down or someone falls overboard, we jump out of a helicopter and get them. In practice, it's one of the most dangerous jobs in the military. This incident happened in March of 2018. We got a distress call from a crabbing vessel called the Pacific Mariner. They were taking on water fast, about 20 miles offshore, seas running 15 to 20 feet, water temperature around 38 degrees. By the time we got airborne and reached their coordinates, the boat was already going under. We could see the crew in the water, 5 guys in survival suits, all together, all conscious. Textbook rescue scenario. I got lowered down, started hooking them up one by one. First guy, second guy, third guy, all good. But when I got to the 4th guy, he grabbed my arm and started screaming over the rotor noise. There's someone else still down there." I looked at the boat. It was nearly vertical now, stern pointing straight up, bow already submerged, maybe 30 seconds before it went completely under. The guy was frantic. He went back inside. He went back for his gear. He's trapped. I made a split-second decision. I told the helo to hold position, and I swam toward the sinking vessel. I could see the wheelhouse was already underwater, but there was still an access hatch on the stern that was above the waterline. I reached it just as the boat started its final slide down. The hatch was open. I took a breath and went in. The interior was a nightmare. Water rushing in from every direction, debris floating everywhere, complete darkness except for my helmet light. The boat was tilted at a severe angle and sinking fast. I made my way through the galley, calling out, listening for any response. Nothing, just the groan of metal and the rush of water. I was about to turn back when I saw him, a man in his 50s, pinned against a bulkhead by a loose refrigerator unit. The water was up to his chest and rising. I got to him, tried to shift the refrigerator. It barely moved. The boat lurched, tilted further. Water was at his neck now. "I'm not getting out," he said, calm. Matter of fact. "Yes, you are," I told him. "I'm not leaving without you. You have to." He looked at me with these very clear, very steady eyes. "This boat's going down in 30 seconds. If you stay, you're coming with it." The water was at his chin. The boat groaned again, a sound like tearing metal. "Tell my wife I'm sorry," he said. "Tell her I love her." The water covered his mouth. His eyes were still open, still looking at me. I had maybe 10 seconds to get out. I pulled with everything I had, but the refrigerator wouldn't budge. The water was over his nose now. His eyes were still open. I had to leave him. I made it out of that hatch with maybe 5 seconds to spare. The boat disappeared beneath the surface 3 seconds later. The whole thing gone. Just debris and diesel slick on the surface. We got the other 4 guys out. They survived, but I left one behind. His name was Robert Chen. He was 53 years old. He'd been fishing Alaskan waters for 28 years. He had a wife and 2 daughters in Seattle. The official report said he died in the sinking, trapped below deck when the vessel went down. It's technically true, but what the report doesn't say is that I looked into his eyes as the water covered his face. I watched him drown, and I swam away because staying would have meant drowning with him. I finished my contract with the Coast Guard, but I didn't re-enlist. I couldn't. Every rescue after that, I kept seeing his face under the water, calm, resigned, understanding. Sometimes I still dream about that hatch. In the dream, I stay. I keep pulling at that refrigerator, and sometimes, just sometimes, it moves. But then I wake up and I remember that I left him there, and that's something I have to live with for the rest of my life. I worked as a marine biologist for NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, for 9 years. Most of my work involved studying deep-sea ecosystems, cataloging species, and documenting the effects of climate change on ocean life. In 2020, we were conducting a survey of the Monterey Canyon off the coast of California using a remotely operated vehicle, an ROV equipped with cameras and sampling equipment. The canyon drops to over 12,000 feet, one of the deepest underwater gorges in North America. We were at about 8,000 feet when we found it. The ROV's cameras picked up something large on the seafloor. At first, we thought it was a whale fall, a dead whale that had sunk to the bottom, providing food for deep-sea scavengers. But as we got closer, we realized it wasn't a whale. It was roughly whale-sized, maybe 40 feet long, but the shape was all wrong. It had a cylindrical body, smooth and pale, with no visible fins or tail, and it was covered in what looked like regular patterns, lines and symbols etched into its surface. "Is that carved?" one of my colleagues asked. It looked carved. The patterns were too uniform, too deliberate to be natural. But what animal has the cognitive ability to carve patterns into its own body? And if it wasn't carved by the animal itself, what had done it? We maneuvered the ROV closer, training all cameras on the specimen. The patterns became clearer, geometric shapes repeating sequences, almost like writing. Then it moved, not a twitch or a spasm, a deliberate, fluid movement. The entire body shifted, rotating toward our cameras, and we saw its face. I'm a scientist. I've studied deep-sea creatures for my entire career. I've seen anglerfish, viperfish, gulper eels, animals that look like nightmares. But this was different. It had eyes, large, forward-facing eyes like a mammal's, not the flat, dead eyes of a fish. These had depth, awareness. They were looking at the camera, looking at us. It had something like a mouth, too, but horizontal instead of vertical. When it opened, and it did open slowly, deliberately, we saw rows of flat, grinding teeth, not for tearing flesh, for crushing. "Back up," our team lead said quietly. "Back the ROV up, now." We reversed thrust, pulling the ROV away. The specimen followed, not fast but steady, keeping pace with us. One of our team members started taking screenshots, capturing every angle. Another was frantically typing notes. I just watched the monitors, unable to look away from those eyes. At 7,800 feet it stopped following. It hung there in the water, perfectly still, just watching our ROV retreat. Then it slowly descended back toward the canyon floor and disappeared into the darkness. We surfaced the ROV immediately. The entire research vessel was silent for a long time. Finally, someone asked what we all were thinking. What the hell was that? We submitted our findings to NOAA. Video footage, sonar data, photographs, everything. We expected excitement, maybe disbelief, definitely a follow-up expedition. Instead, we got silence. 2 weeks later, our team lead was informed that our data had been reviewed by appropriate authorities and classified. We were ordered not to discuss our findings publicly, not to publish, not to submit to any scientific journals. When we asked why, we were told it was a matter of national security. National security for a deep-sea creature, unless what we found wasn't a creature at all. Unless those patterns on its surface weren't natural or self-inflicted. Unless it was something else entirely. I left NOAA a year later. Couldn't handle the bureaucracy, the secrecy, the feeling that we'd found something important and it was being buried. Sometimes I pull up those screenshots on my personal hard drive, copies I made before they classified everything. I look at those patterns, those eyes, that deliberate movement toward our cameras, and I wonder what else is down there in the deep. What else is watching us from places we can't reach? What else has been carved with symbols we don't understand? I worked as a deep-sea commercial diver for about 7 years, mostly on offshore oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. We'd go down to inspect wellheads, repair pipeline, perform routine maintenance. Anything that needed human hands in places ROVs couldn't reach. Most dives were routine. You go down, you do your job, you come up. But every so often, something happens that reminds you how utterly hostile the ocean is to human life. This was in 2017. We were working on a platform about 60 miles offshore, water depth around 400 feet. My job was to inspect the anchor chains, massive links of steel that kept the platform from drifting. I'd done this dozens of times. You swim down the chain, looking for cracks, corrosion, anything that might compromise integrity. Takes about 40 minutes per chain, and this platform had 8 of them. I was on chain number 5 when I noticed something odd. About 200 feet down, one of the links looked different. Discolored, maybe. I descended closer to inspect it. That's when I saw the hand, a human hand, wrapped around the chain link, still wearing a dive glove, still attached to an arm. I stopped, my regulator suddenly very loud in my ears. The hand and arm were wedged between 2 links like whoever it belonged to had gotten caught and couldn't pull free. I reported it immediately over the comm line. Surface told me to stay put. They were sending down my partner. While I waited, I couldn't stop staring at that arm. The dive suit was old, at least 10 or 15 years out of date. Whoever this was had been down here for a long time. My partner arrived 5 minutes later. Together we tried to examine the rest of the body, but it was impossible to see much. The diver was completely tangled in the chain, twisted around multiple links. Surface decided to bring us both up and send down a body recovery team. We ascended, decompressing at the required intervals. The recovery team went down with cutting equipment. They spent 3 hours trying to free the body. When they finally brought it up, we understood why it took so long. The diver had been wrapped around the chain at least 4 times. The chain links had somehow threaded through the body, like someone had deliberately woven it through. But here's what I couldn't understand. Those anchor chains don't move. Once they're set, they're stationary. How does a diver get wrapped around a stationary chain 4 times? The dive supervisor pulled the personnel records, found a report from 2003. A diver named Marcus Webb had gone missing during a routine inspection dive on this same platform. They'd searched for 3 days, never found him. Eventually ruled it an equipment failure, assumed he'd drifted away with the current, but he hadn't drifted anywhere. He'd been right there, 200 feet down, wrapped around that chain for 14 years. The medical examiner found something else. The cause of death wasn't drowning or equipment failure. It was blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. Someone or something had hit him hard enough to crack his helmet, and there were marks on his tanks, deep gouges, like something with claws or teeth had tried to tear through the metal. The company shut down all diving operations on that platform for a week while they investigated. They never found anything. No evidence of what had happened. No explanation for how he'd gotten wrapped around that chain or what had hit him. They cleared the platform for operation and we went back to work, but I never went down that chain again. Whenever I was assigned to inspect it, I'd find some excuse, equipment issue, weather concerns, anything. Because here's what I couldn't shake. If someone or something attacked Marcus Webb in 2003 and wrapped his body around that chain, what's to say it isn't still down there, waiting for the next diver to come along? I quit diving 6 months later, took a job on land working equipment maintenance, better pay, safer conditions, and most importantly, no chains. But sometimes I still dream about that hand, wrapped around cold steel, 200 feet below the surface, in the dark. And I wonder if Marcus Webb was the first, or if there are others down there too, wrapped around chains and pipelines and wellheads, waiting to be found. I worked as a salvage diver for 12 years. When ships sink, someone has to go down and either recover the cargo or assess whether the wreck is worth bringing up. That someone was usually me and my crew. Most wrecks are straightforward. Merchant vessels, fishing boats, occasionally a yacht. The job is dangerous but routine. You document, you assess, you recover what's valuable, and you surface. This wreck was different. We got contracted in 2019 to assess a cargo ship that had gone down about 40 miles off the coast of North Carolina. The Ocean Meridian, a mid-sized freighter carrying consumer electronics from China to Norfolk. It went down in a storm, sudden and catastrophic. The distress call was garbled, something about taking on water fast. By the time Coast Guard got there, the ship was gone. All 23 crew members lost. Our job was to locate the wreck and determine if any of the cargo was salvageable. The insurance company was willing to pay good money for those electronics if they'd been properly sealed. We found the wreck at 180 feet, deeper than ideal, but workable. The ship was on its side, hull breached in multiple places. Definitely went down in a hurry. My partner and I did the initial survey dive. We documented the exterior damage, located the cargo holds, took photos for the surface team. Standard procedure. But when we swam around to the starboard side, we found something that wasn't in the manifest. A lifeboat, still attached to the davits, still covered like it had never been deployed. That was strange. If the ship went down as fast as the records suggested, the crew would have launched the lifeboats immediately. But this one hadn't been touched. "Should we check it out?" my partner asked over the comm. "Might as well. Could be bodies inside." We swam up to the boat and pulled back the cover. There were bodies inside, all 23 crew members, still in their uniforms, still wearing their life jackets. They were sitting upright on the benches, perfectly arranged, like they were waiting for the boat to be lowered. But the boat had never been lowered. They'd somehow gotten inside, secured the cover, and then just sat there while the ship went down. "Jesus Christ," my partner whispered. "Why didn't they deploy?" I moved closer, shining my light through the opening. That's when I saw their faces. They weren't calm. They weren't peaceful. Their mouths were open, eyes wide, expressions frozen in absolute terror. And there were marks on their necks, deep bruising like they'd been strangled. All 23 of them. Strangled. Then arranged in the lifeboat like dolls. We surfaced immediately and reported what we'd found. The Coast Guard came back with a forensics team. They brought the lifeboat up, documented everything. The medical examiner confirmed it. All 23 crew members had died from asphyxiation before the ship sank. Someone or something had killed them one by one, then placed their bodies in that lifeboat. But here's what the Coast Guard couldn't explain. The lifeboat cover was secured from the inside. Whoever, or whatever, killed those men had been inside the lifeboat with them when the ship went down. And there were 23 bodies in that boat. But according to the manifest, the Ocean Meridian only had 23 crew members total. So either the manifest was wrong, or whoever killed those men got out somehow before we found them. The investigation went on for months. They tore apart the shipping company's records, interviewed everyone who'd had contact with the ship, checked backgrounds on all the crew. Nothing. No motive, no suspects, no explanation. The case is still open. Officially, it's considered a mass murder, perpetrator unknown. But I've been diving wrecks for over a decade. I've seen strange things, impossible things. And I can tell you one thing for certain. Whatever killed those men wasn't human. Humans don't arrange bodies like that. Humans don't seal themselves inside a lifeboat on a sinking ship. And humans don't leave bruises that look like handprints with 6 fingers. I still work salvage, but I won't go near the Ocean Meridian. The insurance company offered triple our usual rate to go back and recover the cargo. I turned it down. Whatever's down there can keep the electronics. I'm not going back to that lifeboat. Some wrecks are better left undisturbed. I worked as offshore maintenance crew on oil rigs in the North Sea for 8 years. It's brutal work. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 12-hour shifts, harsh weather, isolation. But the pay is excellent and the work is steady. This happened on a platform called Brent Charlie, about 120 miles northeast of the Shetland Islands. We were doing routine checks on the mooring system, the cables and anchors that keep the platform stable. Part of the maintenance involved sending down an ROV to inspect the mooring lines visually. We'd done it dozens of times. The ROV goes down, cameras on. We watch from the control room, looking for cracks, fraying, anything unusual. This time was different. The ROV reached the first mooring line at about 500 feet. Everything looked normal at first. Then we saw the markings. Someone had carved words into the steel cable. Deep gouges, clearly deliberate. We zoomed in with the camera. "Stay away." My supervisor and I looked at each other. Who the hell would carve a warning into a mooring cable 500 feet underwater? "Check the next line," he said. We maneuvered the ROV to the second cable. More words. "They know you're here." We checked the third line. "Don't go deeper." By this point, everyone in the control room had gathered around the monitors. Nobody was saying anything. We all just stared at those words carved into the steel. "This is a prank," my supervisor finally said. "Has to be. Someone from maintenance crew trying to scare us." But I'd worked with every person on that crew. None of them were divers. None of them could have gone down there to carve those words. We should have surfaced the ROV then. Should have reported it to management, run diagnostics, figured out what was going on. Instead, my supervisor ordered the ROV deeper. "Let's see what's down there, that someone doesn't want us to see." We descended past 600 feet, 700 feet, 800 feet. The water was getting darker, the cameras struggling to make out details even with the lights on. At 900 feet, the ROV's sonar picked up something large. Not part of the rig structure, not a shipwreck, something else. We adjusted the cameras trying to get a visual. That's when the ROV started malfunctioning. The thrusters cut out, the lights flickered, and the cameras showed something moving toward us through the water. It was big, way bigger than any fish or whale, and it was moving with purpose, swimming directly toward the ROV. "Get it out of there," someone said. "Pull it up, now." We activated the emergency ascent, reeling in the tether as fast as the winch could manage. The cameras were still recording, still showing that shape pursuing us. At 700 feet, the cameras cut out completely. We lost visual. At 500 feet, we lost sonar. At 300 feet, we felt impact on the tether. Something had grabbed the ROV. We kept reeling. Whatever had the ROV wasn't letting go. The winch was straining, groaning with the weight. We could feel it fighting us, trying to pull the ROV back down. Then suddenly the tension released. The tether went slack. We reeled in the rest of it faster than I've ever seen a winch operate. When the ROV broke the surface, we saw why. It had been torn in half. The camera housing was crushed. The thruster assembly was missing entirely. And across the remaining section of the ROV, someone had carved 4 words. "We told you so." Management shut down all underwater operations immediately. They brought in a specialist team to inspect the rig, check all systems, make sure we weren't in danger. The specialist team found nothing unusual, but they also refused to send any divers or ROVs below 400 feet. Said the risk wasn't worth it. The platform's been operating normally for 3 years now, but we never go deeper than 400 feet. Never check those lower mooring lines. We just trust they're holding. I transferred to a different rig 6 months after that incident. Couldn't shake the feeling that something was down there, watching us, warning us away. And here's what I can't stop thinking about. Those words were carved into the steel with something. Something sharp enough and strong enough to gouge metal at depth. Whatever's down there under Brent Charlie, it can write. It knows we're up here. And it doesn't want us to come any deeper.